The chamber was enormous. Commander Sarah Chen stood in the center of a circular floor that seemed to glow with its own light. Around her, rising up like an amphitheater, sat representatives from 36 alien species. Their eyes in all different shapes and colors stared down at her. Some looked curious. Others looked angry. All of them looked like they had already decided she was guilty. Sarah kept her hands behind her back, military style. Next to her stood Ambassador Marcus Webb, Earth's chief diplomat to the Galactic Council. He looked nervous. She didn't blame him. This was only humanity's third year as a member of the Council, and already they were on trial. Commander Chen, a voice boomed across the chamber. It came from Ambassador Theknor, a Korthan whose scales gleamed like polished metal under the lights. The Korthan were old, proud, and very particular about rules. You stand accused of violating the accords of civilized warfare. How do you plead? Sarah didn't answer right away. She let the silence stretch out, feeling the weight of history on her shoulders. 3 months ago, human forces had stopped a Korthan expansion fleet in Sector 7. It wasn't supposed to be a real war, just a border dispute. Both sides had agreed to keep it small. But now the Korthan were angry about how they lost. I don't plead anything, Sarah said finally. Her voice was calm and clear. Because I don't recognize the charges. A wave of shocked whispers rolled through the chamber. Ambassador Webb touched her arm, a warning, but she ignored him. Theknor's scales seemed to darken. You don't recognize the accords? They have governed warfare among civilized species for over 10,000 of your years. Every member of this council has signed them. That's interesting, Sarah said. She pulled out a small datapad and looked at it. Because I've read the accords. All 300 pages. Very detailed. Very specific about what's allowed and what isn't. But I noticed something missing. And what would that be? Asked Ambassador Sylvine of the Valix Confederation. The Valix looked almost human except for their silver skin and 3 eyes. They were known for being honorable warriors who followed every rule exactly. Earth's signature, Sarah said. We never signed your accords. The chamber erupted. Aliens shouted in a dozen different languages. Some of them had translation devices that turned their words into standard council speech, creating a chaos of overlapping voices. Sarah stood quietly in the center of it all, waiting. Theknor slammed something heavy against his podium. The sound echoed like a gong, and slowly the chamber fell silent. Whether you signed or not is irrelevant. You are a member of this council. You are expected to follow council laws. We follow laws, Sarah agreed. Laws about trade, about territory, about diplomatic relations. We agreed to all of those when we joined. But the accords of civilized warfare are not a law. They're a treaty, and we're not part of that treaty. Then you admit you violated them, said a new voice. This one belonged to Observer Kreenath of the Zirine Collective. The Zirine were the oldest species in the council, ancient beyond human understanding. They rarely spoke, which made everyone pay attention when they did. I admit we didn't follow them, Sarah said. That's different from violating them. You can't break rules you never agreed to follow. Semantics, Theknor hissed. Let us review what your forces did in Sector 7. Perhaps that will clarify why you are here. The lights in the chamber dimmed. A holographic display appeared in the air above Sarah's head, so large that everyone could see it clearly. It showed a star system with several planets and dozens of ships moving through space. This is the Sector 7 engagement, Theknor narrated. My people's fleet approached the disputed mining colony following proper protocol. We transmitted our intentions clearly. We moved in formation. We waited for your response. The hologram showed Korthan ships in neat rows advancing slowly. Your fleet responded by running away. The display showed human ships retreating quickly. Several council members made sounds of disapproval. This was your first dishonor. You refused to meet us in proper battle formation. Sarah watched the hologram but said nothing. We pursued, as is our right. But then, Theknor's voice grew sharp with anger. Your ships that had retreated suddenly appeared behind us. They had not retreated at all. They had circled around, hiding behind the system's asteroid field. This was an ambush, a deception. The hologram showed human ships emerging from behind rocks and debris, catching the Korthan fleet from an unexpected direction. The Korthan ships, still in their neat formations, struggled to turn and respond. Furthermore, Sylvine added, her 3 eyes narrowed. Your forces used electronic warfare to confuse Korthan sensors. You broadcast false signals. You made them think there were more human ships than actually existed. In the Velix Confederation, we call this cowardice. A warrior should face their enemy honestly, not hide behind tricks and lies. The hologram continued playing. It showed human ships breaking apart into smaller groups, never staying in one place long enough for the Corthan to target them properly. They hit supply lines instead of fighting the main fleet. They disabled ships without destroying them, creating obstacles that the Corthan had to navigate around. They made every engagement quick and confusing, then vanished before reinforcements could arrive. And here, Theknor said, pointing to a moment in the recording, is the worst offense. Your commander sent a message to my fleet admiral. He said, we are retreating to repair our damaged ships. We request a 3-day ceasefire to recover our wounded. Sarah remembered that message. She had written it herself. My admiral, being honorable, agreed to this ceasefire. It is standard practice. Even in war, we show mercy to the wounded. Theknor's voice shook with rage. But there were no wounded. Your ships were not damaged. The entire message was a lie. While my fleet waited, honoring the ceasefire, your forces used that time to reposition and fortify the colony. When we resumed combat, we found it impossible to take without massive casualties. We were forced to withdraw. The hologram faded. The lights came back up. Sarah could feel the weight of judgment pressing down from all sides. These tactics, Observer Kreenath said slowly, are beneath civilized species. Deception, ambush, false communications, refusal to engage in direct combat. These things create chaos and undermine the very foundation of orderly warfare. If every species fought as humans do, there would be no rules at all. Only savagery. The Council demands an explanation, Commander Chen, Theknor said, and then we will determine appropriate consequences for your species. Sarah took a deep breath. She looked up at the Council members, at their alien faces filled with confusion and anger. They truly didn't understand. To them, warfare was a ritual, a formal process with clear rules. They had never needed to fight any other way. You want an explanation? Sarah said. She smiled just a little. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret that was about to change everything. We've reviewed your accords. Fascinating reading. Very detailed. Very civilized. She paused, letting her words sink in. But here's the thing, we never signed them. And there's a reason for that. She gestured to Ambassador Webb, who pulled up new files on his datapad. With the Council's permission, I'd like to present evidence of our own. A history lesson, if you will. Because you asked how we fight and why we fight that way. I think it's time you understood where humans come from, and why your rules don't apply to us. She looked directly at Theknor. That's why we wrote our own. The Council chamber remained silent as Ambassador Webb activated the holographic display. Sarah stepped back, giving the images room to form in the center of the floor. She had spent weeks preparing this presentation. Now was the moment to make them understand. This is Earth, she began. A blue and green planet appeared, rotating slowly. Our homeworld. We joined your council 3 years ago, but our history of warfare goes back thousands of years. Not hundreds, not decades, thousands. All species have ancient conflicts, Theknor interrupted. What makes humans special? What makes us special, Sarah replied, is that we developed warfare before we developed honor. The hologram changed. It showed Earth's ancient past. Humans with primitive weapons living in small groups. Sarah gestured to the display. Early humans were not the strongest creatures on our planet. We couldn't outrun the predators that hunted us. We couldn't outfight them with our bodies. So we learned to outthink them. The image shifted to show ancient humans hunting. They didn't charge at their prey directly. Instead, they worked together using tools and strategy. They drove animals off cliffs. They set traps. They used fire to control where herds moved. Survival meant being smarter, not stronger, Sarah continued. This shaped everything about how we think about conflict. We learned early that the one who wins is not always the one with the most power. Sometimes it's the one with the best plan. Observer Kreenath leaned forward in her seat. You are saying humans are naturally deceptive? I'm saying humans are naturally adaptable, Sarah corrected. Let me show you our military history. The hologram jumped forward in time. It showed an ancient Chinese man sitting at a desk writing on long scrolls. This is Sun Tzu. He lived over 2,500 years ago. He wrote a book about warfare that humans still study today. Words appeared in the air, translated into council standard. All warfare is based on deception. When able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must appear inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. When far away, we must make him believe we are near. The council chamber filled with disturbed murmurs. Sylvine spoke up, her 3 eyes wide. This is your foundation? Built on lies. Built on reality, Sarah said firmly. Sun Tzu understood that in real war there's no referee. There's no one to make sure both sides follow the rules. There's only survival or defeat. He taught that the best victory is the one achieved without fighting at all. Make your enemy believe they cannot win and they will surrender without bloodshed. The hologram changed again. It showed a massive wooden horse being pulled into an ancient city. This is the Trojan horse from a war fought over 3,000 years ago. One side couldn't break through the city wall, so they pretended to give up and leave a gift. The gift was hollow, filled with soldiers. When the city brought the horse inside, the soldiers emerged at night and opened the gates. Shameful, Thecnor muttered. Effective, Sarah countered. That's the point. The side with the horse won. The side that trusted their enemy lost their entire city. She paused. And here's something important. We still tell this story. We teach it to our children, not as a warning about being evil, but as a lesson about thinking creatively. She continued through human history. The display showed Hannibal crossing the Alps with elephants, taking a route everyone said was impossible. It showed small groups of colonists in Earth's American Revolution, refusing to fight in neat lines like their enemy expected, instead shooting from behind trees and rocks. The British had superior training and more soldiers, Sarah explained. They fought in formation, following all the proper rules of 18th century warfare. The colonists fought to win using terrain and surprise. The colonists won their independence. The images kept coming. Nomadic warriors from the Asian steppes, conquering most of a continent by using speed and mobility instead of static armies. Underground resistance fighters during Earth's great wars, using sabotage and intelligence gathering to fight occupying forces. Ambassador Webb spoke for the first time. Every example Commander Chen is showing you would violate your accords. Ambushes, deception, attacking supply lines instead of armies, fighting at night, using terrain as a weapon. But these aren't stories of villains. These are our heroes, the clever ones who found ways to win against overwhelming odds. Sylvine stood up. But where is the honor? Where is the dignity? When my ancestors fought, they met on chosen fields. They announced their intentions. They gave their opponents time to prepare. Warriors faced each other as equals, and the better force won. This is how civilized beings conduct warfare. Sarah nodded slowly. I understand that's your tradition. But let me ask you something. When did your species develop space travel? What does that have to do with anything? Sylvine demanded. Just answer the question, please. Sylvine's silver skin darkened slightly with irritation. The Valix achieved faster than light travel 8,000 years ago by your calendar. And when did your species start having wars? After we achieved space travel, we encountered other species and had to establish territorial boundaries. Sometimes this led to conflict, which we resolved through honorable combat. Sarah turned to Thecnor. And the Korthan? Similar, Thecnor admitted. We reached the stars, met other races, and occasionally fought for resources or territory. We created the Accords to make sure such conflicts remained manageable. That's the difference, Sarah said quietly. You developed warfare after you became spacefaring civilizations. It was always something formal, something you could control and regulate. But humans? We were fighting each other for 50,000 years before we left our planet. She let that sink in. 50,000 years. Fighting over food, water, land, resources. Fighting with sticks and stones, then bronze and iron, then gunpowder and missiles. Fighting in deserts and jungles and frozen wastelands. Fighting when we were hungry, desperate, and dying. We didn't have the luxury of making warfare honorable. We had to make it effective. The hologram returned to Earth, showing the planet covered in different territories and nations. Even now, we have over 200 separate nations on our homeworld. For most of our history, we were divided. Humans fighting humans. We learned to fight against enemies who knew us, who thought like us, who could predict our strategies. So we learned to be unpredictable. Observer Krenoth spoke again, her ancient voice thoughtful. You are saying that humans developed warfare as a survival trait, not as a political tool. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. For us, war has never been civilized. It's always been about living or dying, Your rules were written by species who could afford honor. You wrote them after you had food security, after you had spread across multiple planets, after you had resources to spare. You wrote them when losing a battle meant losing territory, not losing your entire civilization. She walked closer to the council seats, looking up at them. We wrote our rules when we had nothing to spare. When losing meant extinction. When fighting fair meant fighting stupid, because the stakes were too high to care about looking honorable. We wrote our rules to survive. Then your rules are savage, Theknor said, but he sounded less certain now. Our rules are practical, Sarah replied. Let me be very clear about something. We don't enjoy deception for its own sake. We don't ambush enemies because we think it's fun. We do these things because they work. Because in a real fight, when everything is on the line, winning matters more than how you win. She pulled up one final image. It showed a human soldier from Earth's recent history, crouched in mud and rain, looking exhausted and scared. This is what war looks like for us. Not glorious formations and announced battles. Real war is ugly. It's frightening. It's people doing terrible things because they don't want to die. We learned a long time ago that if you're going to fight, you fight to end it as quickly as possible with as few casualties as possible, even if that means breaking someone else's rules. The chamber was quiet. Sarah could see some of the council members thinking, really thinking about what she had said. Others still looked angry or disgusted. You cannot simply ignore galactic standards because they are inconvenient, Sylvine said, but her voice was softer now, less certain. We're not ignoring them because they're inconvenient, Sarah said. We're refusing them because they're dangerous. Following your accords would mean fighting with one hand tied behind our backs. It would mean throwing away thousands of years of human experience and expertise. It would mean sending our soldiers to die in honorable battles that we could win more easily, and with fewer deaths if we used our own methods. She stood straighter, shoulders back. You asked for an explanation. There it is. Humans fight the way we do because it's the only way we know, because it's kept us alive through ice ages and plagues and wars against ourselves, because when you grow up on a planet where everything wants to kill you, you learn to use every advantage you have. Even if that advantage is dishonor? Theknor asked. Sarah met his gaze. We don't call it dishonor. We call it winning. After Sarah's presentation, the council called for a recess. She stood with Ambassador Webb in a side chamber, drinking something that tasted almost like coffee but wasn't quite right. Through the transparent walls, she could see groups of aliens talking in clusters, their body language showing confusion and concern. Do you think they understood? Webb asked quietly. Some of them, Sarah replied, but understanding isn't the same as accepting. When the council reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted. The anger was still there but mixed with something else now. Uncertainty. Sylvine spoke first, her silver skin pale. Commander Chen, you have explained your history, but you have not addressed the fundamental concern. Without rules, without standards, warfare becomes chaos. It becomes unlimited violence with no boundaries. I disagree, Sarah said. Humans have boundaries. We just don't call them the same things you do. Explain. Observer Kreenath commanded. Sarah gestured to Webb, who brought up new documents on the display. These are the Geneva Conventions written by humans over 200 years ago. They establish rules for warfare, protection for prisoners, restrictions on weapons that cause unnecessary suffering, protections for civilians and medical personnel. Theknor studied the documents floating in the air. These are different from the Accords. Yes, Sarah agreed, because they focus on different things. Your Accords focus on how battles should be fought. Our conventions focus on how people should be treated. You care about honor in combat. We care about humanity even in war. A younger council member spoke up, a Korthan officer named Vektar who had been silent until now. But Commander, if there are no rules about tactics, how do you prevent total chaos? How do you train soldiers? How do you plan operations? It was a good question, and Sarah was glad someone asked it. We train by teaching principles, not rigid procedures. Let me give you an example. In your military, how do you respond to an ambush? Vektar stood straighter, proud. The standard response is documented in the Accords. The ambushed force immediately sends a distress signal, establishes a defensive perimeter, and waits for reinforcements while maintaining honor by not retreating. And everyone knows this response? Sarah asked. Of course, it is the proper procedure. Then any enemy who knows the Accords can predict exactly what you'll do, Sarah pointed out. They know you won't retreat. They know you'll form a perimeter. They know you'll wait for help, so they can plan around your response. Vektar's scales darkened with realization. He sat down slowly. Sarah continued. Human soldiers are taught principles. Maintain communication, assess the threat, use available cover, control your panic. But the specific response depends on the situation. Maybe you retreat. Maybe you attack. Maybe you scatter. Maybe you try to negotiate. The enemy can't predict what you'll do because you don't know what you'll do until you see the situation. That sounds like confusion, Sylvine said. It's flexibility, Sarah corrected. And it works because we train for uncertainty. Our soldiers practice responding to surprises. They learn to think, not just to follow orders. She pulled up a recording from a human training exercise. It showed soldiers going through a simulated battle that suddenly changed completely. The enemy they expected didn't arrive. Instead, civilians appeared. The objective moved. Equipment failed. Through it all, the soldiers had to keep adapting, making new plans every few minutes. This looks exhausting, commented Ambassador Felmoth of the Draken Assembly. The Draken were known for their methodical approach to everything. It is exhausting, Sarah admitted, but it prepares our people for reality. Because in real combat, nothing goes according to plan. The enemy does unexpected things. Equipment breaks. Intelligence is wrong. Weather changes. If you can only follow a script, you're helpless when the script doesn't work anymore. Observer Kreenath tilted her head, and gesture of deep thought among her species. You speak of the enemy as if they are actively thinking, actively trying to counter your plans. Because they are, Sarah said, surprised. Aren't yours? There was an uncomfortable pause. Finally, Sylvine spoke. In our traditions, both sides agree to a battle plan beforehand. We acknowledge that warfare is necessary sometimes, but we try to make it orderly, predictable. Each side knows what the other will do, generally. The one with better resources, training, or technology wins. It is clean and clear, Sarah stared at her. But that's not warfare. That's a contest. A game. It is civilized, Sylvine insisted, but she sounded defensive. It's suicide, Sarah said bluntly. What happens when you face an enemy who doesn't follow your traditions? Someone who doesn't care about being orderly or predictable? Dagnor's voice was cold. Such enemies are rare. Most civilized species understand the importance of the accords. Those who don't are usually destroyed quickly for being too chaotic to function. Or maybe, Sarah suggested carefully, they're avoided because no one wants to fight an enemy who doesn't follow the rules. The silence that followed was heavy. Sarah could see the truth sinking in. The galactic community had built their entire military culture around the assumption that everyone would fight the same way. They had never seriously prepared for an opponent who wouldn't cooperate with that assumption. A human voice came from the doorway. Permission to address the council? Sarah turned. Dr. James Morrison walked into the chamber carrying a data pad. He was a military historian from Earth, one of the experts she had requested. The council gestured for him to approach. Thank you, Dr. Morrison said. He was an older man, his hair white, but his voice was strong. I've been listening to this discussion, and I think there's a concept you need to understand about human warfare. We call it the enemy gets a vote. Meaning what? Asked Felmoth. Meaning that you can't control what your opponent does. You can make plans, but your enemy is also making plans. You can follow rules, but your enemy might not. You can hope for honor, but your enemy might choose pragmatism instead. Dr. Morrison tapped his data pad, and historical data filled the display. Throughout human history, armies that were too rigid, too bound by rules were defeated by armies that could adapt. He showed battles where the proper side lost to unconventional tactics. Knights in heavy armor defeated by peasants with pikes. Professional armies beaten by guerrilla fighters. Fortresses bypassed instead of attacked. The lesson we learned over and over is that warfare is a conversation between opponents. Both sides are trying to solve problems and create problems for the other side. If you only know one way to fight, you're helpless against someone who knows two ways. Vektar spoke up again. But without standards, how do you prevent escalation? How do you stop war from becoming total destruction? Dr. Morrison nodded approvingly at the question. That's where human conventions come in. We don't restrict tactics, but we do restrict cruelty. We don't tell soldiers how to fight, but we do tell them who not to hurt. Civilians, prisoners, wounded soldiers, medical staff, these are boundaries we enforce strictly. Even against enemies who don't follow those boundaries? Sylvine asked. Especially against enemies who don't follow them, Dr. Morrison said firmly. Because that's how we stay human. We win battles with tactics, but we keep our civilization with ethics. The two things are separate. Sarah took over again. Your accords try to make warfare nice and clean and honorable. But they ignore the reality that war is fundamentally about two sides trying to kill each other. Making it follow polite rules doesn't change that basic truth. It just makes both sides worse at their job. And what is that job? Observer Kreenath asked. Protecting your people by defeating threats as quickly and efficiently as possible, Sarah answered. Every day a war continues is another day people die. Every battle you lose because you followed rules instead of using your best tactics is a battle where soldiers died for nothing. You call our methods dishonorable. We call your methods wasteful. Theknor stood abruptly. You speak as if honor has no value at all. I didn't say that, Sarah replied calmly. Honor has tremendous value. But it's personal honor, the honor of treating prisoners well and protecting civilians. It's not the honor of fighting in neat lines so your enemy has a fair chance to kill you. That's not honor. That's stupidity. The chamber erupted again. Some council members shouted support for Theknor. Others looked thoughtful. A few were arguing among themselves, questioning things they had never questioned before. Sarah waited for the noise to die down. Then she said, You want to know the real difference between human warfare and yours? You fight to win battles. We fight to end wars. You think about each individual engagement. We think about the overall objective. You want to look good. We want to go home. She pulled up one final image. It showed a human soldier hugging a child, both of them crying. This is what we're fighting for. Not glory, not honor, not to prove we're better warriors. We fight to protect people, and we use every trick, every tactic, every advantage we have because those people deserve to have us win. Quickly, decisively. So we can stop fighting and start rebuilding. Even if the galaxy condemns you for it? Sylvine asked softly. Sarah met her gaze. Even then. Because at the end of the day I'd rather have my soldiers alive and condemned than dead and honored. The words hung in the air. Some council members looked shocked. Others looked offended. But a few, including young Vec 3 days after the heated debates, Theknor made a proposal. He stood before the council with his scales set in their darkest, most formal pattern. We have listened to human arguments, we have seen their history, but words and old battles prove nothing about modern warfare. I propose a test. Sarah had been expecting something like this. What kind of test? War games, Theknor said. Simulated combat between human forces and council forces. No actual death, but real tactics, real decisions, real consequences. We will see if your unconventional methods truly are superior, or if they only work against enemies too weak to matter. It was meant as an insult, but Sarah just smiled. We accept, under one condition. Name it. Half the exercises follow your accords, half follow human doctrine. No restrictions except our own rules about protecting civilians and prisoners. Sylvine looked concerned. You would fight under our rules, following the accords you rejected? We'll try, Sarah said. To make it fair. You follow our way, we follow yours. Then we see what works better. The council agreed. 2 weeks later, both sides met at the Nexus training grounds, a massive facility built for exactly this purpose. It could simulate any environment, any situation. Hundreds of council members came to watch. This wasn't just about tactics anymore. It was about pride, tradition, and the future of galactic military culture. The first exercise used council rules. Human forces, led by Commander Chen personally, faced a Corthan unit following standard accord protocols. The scenario was simple. Capture and hold a strategic position. Sarah hated every minute of it. Move in formation, she ordered, feeling wrong about the words. Announce our intentions on the standard frequency. Wait for their response. Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Park, looked uncomfortable. This feels like we're asking permission to fight. That's basically what we're doing, Sarah muttered. The Corthan responded properly. They acknowledged the human transmission. Both sides maneuvered into position, their movements predictable and formal. The battle, when it came, was straightforward. The Corthan had better positioning and heavier weapons. They won decisively, In the second Accord-based exercise, humans faced Velix forces in a space engagement. Again, the rules required advanced notice, designated combat zones, and formation fighting. The Velix, with centuries of experience in this style of combat, destroyed the human fleet methodically. By the third exercise, Sarah's frustration was visible. Fighting with restrictions felt like wearing chains. Her people kept making mistakes, trying to adapt or maneuver in ways the Accords forbade. Every time they started to use their training, they had to stop and remember the rules. Teknor looked satisfied. Perhaps human tactics are not so superior after all. Perhaps, Sarah agreed. Or perhaps we're just bad at fighting with our hands tied. Shall we try it the other way now? The fourth exercise began with no restrictions, except the rules of engagement. No harming civilians, honor surrender signals, treat prisoners properly. Everything else was fair game. The change in human forces was immediate and dramatic. Instead of announcing their intentions, the human team went silent. They scattered across the training ground instead of staying in formation. When the Korthan forces arrived at the expected combat zone, the humans weren't there. Where are they? Vektar, commanding the Korthan unit, looked at his sensors. They should be here. The objective is here. Maybe they retreated, another Korthan suggested. Then the attacks started. Not from one direction, but from everywhere. Small human teams hit supply depots. They sabotaged communication relays. They created false sensor readings that made the Korthan think there were enemies in places where there were none. This is chaos, Vektar complained. How do we respond? To chaos? His training said to form a defensive perimeter and wait for reinforcements. But every time they formed up, the humans would disappear. And when they relaxed, the attacks would resume. Sarah watched from the command center, finally feeling like herself again. Team 3, loop around and make them think you're coming from the north. Team 1, hit their command post as soon as they move to respond. Team 2, stay hidden and wait. Wait for what? Park asked. For them to get frustrated and make a mistake. They did. Vektar, tired of being harassed, ordered an aggressive push toward where he thought the main human force was hiding. His unit moved fast, breaking formation to cover more ground. That's when Sarah sprang the trap. Human teams appeared behind them, cutting off their retreat. Others appeared on the flanks. Within minutes, the Korthan unit was surrounded and forced to surrender. The observers in the gallery were silent. The next exercise was in space against Velix forces. This time, the Velix expected human trickery. They stayed alert, kept their formation tight, and didn't fall for false sensor readings. So the humans changed tactics completely. Instead of harassing them, the human fleet retreated. The Velix pursued carefully, suspecting an ambush. But the humans kept retreating, drawing the Velix further and further from their supply lines. Then, while the Velix were far from home, a small human team slipped past them and captured their resupply station. This is unacceptable, the Velix commander protested. They didn't even fight us. They didn't have to, Sarah explained. You're a week from resupply, and we control your logistics. In a real war, you'd have to surrender or retreat. You can't fight without fuel and ammunition. But we never even engaged in battle. Exactly, Sarah said. Why fight if we can win without fighting? Why lose people in combat when we can achieve the objective another way? The pattern continued through more exercises. Every time the council forces thought they understood human tactics, the humans did something different. They fought at night when the enemy expected daylight battles. They used electromagnetic pulses to disable sensors, forcing enemies to fight without their technology advantage. They faked retreats that turned into ambushes. They spread false information that made enemies prepare for attacks that never came. The most shocking moment came in the 8th exercise. Human forces faced a combined Korthan and Velix team in a complex scenario involving multiple objectives. The humans fought hard for the primary objective, then lost. The council forces celebrated their victory. Then Sarah revealed the truth. Check the secondary and tertiary objectives. While the human forces had been fighting and losing at the primary location, small teams had quietly captured 3 other strategic positions. The loss at the main objective was intentional, meant to keep enemy forces focused in the wrong place. You lost on purpose? Teknor was stunned. We lost a battle, Sarah corrected. But we won the campaign. There's a difference. You were so focused on defending what you thought mattered most that you ignored everything else. Sylvine looked at the tactical display for a long time. Finally, she said, "This is unsettling. In Velix culture, we value direct confrontation. We face our enemies honestly. But you didn't face us at all. You went around us. Would you rather we got our people killed trying to take an objective we didn't actually need?" Sarah asked. Would that have been more honorable? Sylvine didn't answer. Young Vectar had been growing quieter with each exercise. Now he stood and spoke to the whole assembly. "I think I understand now. We don't fight to win battles. Humans fight to win wars." "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "A battle is just one moment. A war is the overall conflict. Sometimes you lose battles intentionally if it helps you win the war. Sometimes you avoid battles entirely. Sometimes you win without fighting at all, just by making the enemy believe they can't win." She looked at the council members watching from the gallery. "Your accords make sense if both sides agree that individual battles matter more than the final outcome. But they fall apart against an enemy who thinks bigger than that. Against an enemy who's willing to lose 10 battles to win the 11th. Against an enemy who doesn't care about looking good, only about getting results." Teknor's scales had paled considerably. These war games have been illuminating. But I must ask, if human tactics are so effective, why share them with us? Why not keep your advantages secret? "Because," Sarah said, "these games have been against council forces who were trying to follow accord rules. Imagine if you faced a real enemy who didn't care about your rules but who also hadn't developed better tactics. You'd still probably win through superior numbers or technology. But now imagine facing an enemy who fights like we do, but who doesn't follow our rules about protecting civilians. An enemy who uses deception but also uses weapons you consider too cruel. An enemy who fights to win wars but doesn't care about ethics." The idea clearly disturbed them. Observer Kreenath spoke slowly. "You are saying that there are worse things than human tactics." "Much worse," Sarah agreed. "We use unconventional tactics, yes, we break your rules about how to fight. But we still have rules about who to fight and how to treat people. We still have boundaries. Not everyone does." She let that sink in. "Then," she said, "that's why we're willing to teach you what we know. Because the galaxy is big, and not every species you meet is going to be as civilized as you want them to be. You need to know how to fight against someone who doesn't fight fair. Because if you only know one way to fight, you're helpless against so." The council chamber was divided. Sarah could see it clearly in how the members grouped themselves. On one side sat the traditionalists led by Teknor and several older members. They sat rigid, their body language showing resistance to everything the war games had revealed. On the other side sat the progressives, including Vectar, and a growing number of younger council members. They looked uncertain but curious. In the middle sat observer Kreenath and the undecided ones, watching both sides carefully. Teknor spoke first. "The war games proved that human tactics can be effective. I will not deny what we all saw. But effectiveness is not the same as acceptability. The accords exist for a reason. They prevent warfare from becoming savage and unlimited." "Do they, though?" Vectar asked. His boldness in questioning his superior surprised many in the chamber. "Or do they just make us predictable? We lost every exercise where humans use their own methods. Every single one. Not because we lacked skill or courage, but because we couldn't adapt to tactics we'd never considered." "That is precisely the problem," Teknor shot back. "If every species fights in their own way with no common understanding, warfare becomes unpredictable, chaotic. How do you establish peace treaties? How do you negotiate? How do you know when a war is really over?" "The same way we always have," Sarah interjected. "Through clear communication about what you want and what you're willing to accept. The method of fighting doesn't change the end goals." Sylvine rose gracefully, her 3 eyes sad. "Commander Chen, I want to understand your perspective." "Truly I do. But the Velix have followed the accords for thousands of years. They are part of our identity. To abandon them would be to abandon who we are." "I'm not asking you to abandon them," Sarah said carefully. I'm asking you to recognize that they're not universal. They work for species who agree to follow them, but they can't be mandatory for everyone. Then what do you propose? Observer Kreenath's ancient voice cut through the debate. We cannot have some species following the Accords while others do not. That creates exactly the chaos Theknor fears. Sarah had been preparing for this question. I propose we acknowledge reality. Different species have different military traditions. Instead of forcing everyone to follow one set of rules, we create a framework that respects multiple approaches while maintaining ethical boundaries. Explain, Kreenath commanded. Ambassador Webb brought up a new document on the display. Sarah had worked on it for days, with input from human military experts, ethicists, and diplomats. We call it the Diverse Warfare Doctrine. It has two parts. Part 1 establishes universal ethics that all species must follow. Protection for civilians, treatment of prisoners, restrictions on weapons that cause unnecessary suffering. These are non-negotiable. Every species in the Council must agree to these, and we enforce them strictly. Heads nodded around the chamber. These principles were already in the Accords, buried among the tactical regulations. Part 2 acknowledges that tactical doctrine is cultural, not universal. Species can fight according to their own traditions as long as they don't violate Part 1. The Veliks can continue their honorable direct combat if they choose. The Korthan can maintain their formal protocols. Humans can use our adaptive tactics. None of these approaches are wrong. They're just different. But how do species fight each other if they follow different doctrines? Felmuth asked. The same way species with different languages communicate, Sarah replied, with effort and understanding. Before engagement, both sides declare which doctrine they're following. If both sides agree on one approach, they use it. If they can't agree, they acknowledge they're using different methods and proceed with that understanding. Theknor's scales darkened. So humans would never agree to follow the Accords? Probably not, Sarah admitted. But we'd be honest about it. And you'd know going in that we fight our way, not yours. You could prepare accordingly. No surprises. No deception about the rules themselves. A voice came from the back of the chamber. What about enforcement? Sarah turned to see a representative from a species she didn't recognize, small, covered in what looked like feathers with large eyes. If someone violates the universal ethics, who punishes them? The Council, Webb answered. Same as now. But we focus enforcement on actual atrocities. Harm to civilians, mistreatment of prisoners, use of prohibited weapons. Not on whether someone fought in formation or used an ambush. The debate continued for hours. Traditionalists argued that any loosening of the Accords would lead to chaos. Progressives countered that the Accords had created a false sense of security while leaving species vulnerable to unconventional threats. Then, everything changed. A priority alert interrupted the session. A council aide rushed in, his face pale with fear. We have a situation. Colony Epsilon 7 is under attack. The chamber fell silent. Observer Kreenath leaned forward. Under attack by whom? The ravagers. That single word caused panic. The ravagers were known throughout the galaxy as brutal raiders. They followed no rules, showed no mercy, and attacked without warning. The Council had fought them before and always struggled. The ravagers didn't care about the Accords. They were exactly the kind of enemy Sarah had warned about. Theknor stood. How many Council ships are in range? 3 patrol groups. They're moving to intercept, but the aide hesitated. The colony has maybe 4 hours before the ravagers breach the main settlement. The patrol groups are 6 hours away. Send faster ships, Sylvine demanded. There are no faster ships in range. The colony will fall before help arrives. The chamber erupted in desperate discussions. Plans were made and discarded. Every option required more time than they had. Sarah watched Theknor's scales go through several color changes as he tried to find a solution that didn't exist within Council doctrine. Then she spoke. We can get there in time. Every head turned toward her. Explain, Kreenath ordered. The human ship Defiant is 3 hours away. It's a reconnaissance vessel, lightly armed with a crew of 50. Not enough to fight the Ravagers directly, but enough to do something until your patrol groups arrive. What could 50 humans in a scout ship possibly accomplish? Theknor demanded. Sarah met his gaze. Let us show you. The chamber went silent. Everyone understood what she was offering. This was no longer theoretical. Real people were in danger. A real enemy was attacking, and humans were offering to help. Using the exact tactics the Council had spent weeks debating. This is convenient timing, Theknor said suspiciously. It's terrible timing, Sarah shot back, angry now. There are 50,000 people on that colony, including families and children. You think I wanted this? But it's happening, and we can help. The question is whether you'll let us. Observer Kreenath studied Sarah for a long moment. Then she said, what do you need? Permission to engage using human doctrine. No restrictions on tactics beyond our own rules. Full authority for our commander to make decisions without waiting for council approval. You want complete freedom to act as you see fit, Theknor translated. Yes. And if you fail, if the colony falls anyway, Sarah's voice was steady, then Earth will submit to council oversight of our military. We'll follow your accords in all future conflicts. We'll prove we're not reliable enough to be independent. And if you succeed, Sylvine asked quietly, then the council recognizes human military sovereignty. You acknowledge that our way of war is legitimate, even if it's different from yours. The stakes couldn't be higher. Webb looked at Sarah with concern, but she ignored him. This was the moment everything had been building toward. Kreenath looked at the other council members. Some nodded. Others shook their heads. Finally she spoke. The council grants temporary authority. Save the colony, Commander Chen. Show us what human warfare can accomplish when everything is on the line. Sarah didn't wait. She activated her communicator. Defiant, this is Chen. You're cleared for emergency deployment to Epsilon 7. Use whatever tactics necessary. Rules of engagement. Protect civilians, minimize ravager casualties if possible. But priority 1 is saving that colony. Understood, Commander, came the reply. We'll make it count. The display changed to show the tactical situation. The ravagers had 3 ships attacking the colony. They were bombarding the shields, getting ready to land ground forces. The human ship appeared on the edge of the system, moving fast. Instead of heading straight for the colony, the Defiant did something unexpected. It split into multiple sensor signatures using drones and electronic warfare. Suddenly, it looked like 5 human ships were approaching from different directions. Deception, Theknor muttered, but he was watching intently now. The Ravagers noticed the new arrivals. They split their formation, sending one ship to intercept what they thought were enemy reinforcements. That ship left the colony, chasing false contacts through the outer system. Meanwhile, the real Defiant looped around a gas giant, using its magnetic field to mask their approach. They came at the remaining 2 Ravager ships from an angle those ships weren't watching, emerging suddenly from behind the planet. But they didn't attack directly. Instead, they launched missiles that exploded between the Ravager ships and the colony, creating a cloud of metallic chaff that disrupted sensors and communications. What are they doing? Vector asked. They can't win a fight against 2 Ravager ships.